Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we will be talking about an array of once battleground states that are simply drifting more and more away from Donald Trump, and they're simply becoming out of reach for the Donald Trump campaign, at least at this point. We're only 21 days from Election Day, and there are quite a few of once battleground states, especially when Joe Biden was in the race. Some of these look like really 50-50 toss-ups, and they have completely drifted away from the Republicans ever since Kamala Harris has, become a candidate for president and really unified and energized this Democratic Party. So, speaking generally, we have a lot of these battleground states that I've outlined here. But speaking generally, what Kamala Harris has been able to do to really turn the tide of this election, at least in the states that we're going to talk about, is increase voter enthusiasm. And that is extremely important. As you can see here, this is a poll from Axios that asked voters if they were more enthusiastic about this election than voting in previous elections. So you see, in their most recent poll, it's at 69%, almost 70% of adults are more enthusiastic about this election than previous elections. That's pretty incredible, especially compared to the under 50% that it was when Joe Biden was back in the race. The previous dot right here towards the right, that was when Joe Biden was a candidate. And since then, it has skyrocketed. Joe Biden, when he was in the race, it was below 55%. And keep in mind, this isn't just Democrats, this is among all voters. So you can just see the type of effect Kamala Harris has been able to have on the enthusiasm levels of American voters. And this was the major problem with Joe Biden because a lot of these more Democratic states were, becoming toss ups, which makes sense. Of course, enthusiasm, if you have low enthusiasm, it's going to hurt across the board. But where low enthusiasm among Democrats is going to hurt the most is in the blue states like New York, like California, like Washington. That's why Biden was struggling so much in the popular vote. They're going to vote Democratic in the Electoral College, but of course that does hurt his popular vote numbers. And where it also hurts, are these more Democratic states that aren't as safe as California and New York and Illinois and etc. But, these pretty Democratic states that are somewhat close. For example, New Mexico, which voted for Biden by 10 points in the last election, or Virginia, which was a 10-point margin, or Minnesota, which was a 7-point margin, or New Hampshire, which was a 7-point margin, etc. What it did is it made these more bluer states where you've got more Democrats, simply put, who are now less enthusiastic about the campaign, not at all enthusiastic. It made these states toss ups when Joe Biden was in the race, and we can see it simply in the polling numbers. Now, again, this is Biden versus Trump polls. This is not with Harris. As you can see in New Hampshire, he was only ahead by 3. He won the state by 7 in 2020. In Minnesota, he was only ahead by 3. He won it by 7 in the last election. And then the big one, just for one last example, in the state of Virginia, Trump versus Biden, Donald Trump was ahead in the average by 0.4%, despite Biden winning the state by 10 points in the last election. So the fact that Kamala Harris has been really able to surge voter enthusiasm among Democrats, that is important because what it has done is made these pretty Democratic states that were looking like Virginia and Minnesota and New Hampshire and Maine, etc., that they were looking toss-ups under Biden as the presumptive Democratic nominee. She has been able to make Democrats turn out come election day and simply get excited about her campaign, get behind her campaign, and actually spend time trying to do what they can to get her elected. And that has had a huge impact, obviously, on the state of the entire race, the entire nation, and the popular vote, the battleground states, etc. But as I was saying before, where it's going to help the most is these states that lean Democratic, that simply have a lot more Democrats than Republicans, because there are more Democrats than Republicans, and that effect of increased voter enthusiasm among Democrats, that is going to pick up most prominently and noticeably in these states with more Democrats, these more bluer states, if that makes sense. So ultimately, you do have still a lot of battleground states in this election, but you also have quite a few that we simply don't need to talk about anymore that we were when Biden was back in the race, when, they looked like they were core battlegrounds. So in this video, we will be talking about these series of states. So number one, I will bring up because it's the most interesting the trend that we have seen from when Biden was in the race to now Harris as a candidate. That being Virginia, I am extremely confident that Virginia is going to go to Kamala Harris in my updated forecast if it loads here. Kamala Harris, out of the likely Democratic states, Virginia is the best margin for Kamala Harris. She wins it by 9.5%. That's barely any trend towards the Republicans. You can see it only becomes 0.6% more Republican from 2020. It's extremely marginal. And again, that is because, this is a state with a high amount of Democratic voters around the DC area who, you've got a lot of young voters, of course, around DC. You've got a lot of suburbs around DC. That's the most critical voter block in Virginia. And again, what Kamala Harris has been able to do is get people to care about this election. Yes, the Democrats believed the stakes were high, even with Biden as the nominee, but he wasn't effective in making that case. Because all voters could see or even care about was I don't the competency level of Joe Biden. That's all that was visible. At the point. That's all they could possibly care about. So, these suburbs around DC, what Kamala Harris has been able to do is really change how voters view this race when it was a race decided on Joe Biden's level of competency. Of course, that's never good. For if you are Joe Biden, that's never good for you because you have so much to attack Donald Trump on, and it simply wasn't a factor because of you and your level of competency. But Kamala Harris, of course, much more competent, much more with it than Joe Biden. Now she has turned the race back on who Donald Trump is. So a state like Virginia, yes, that will fall under Donald Trump's column. Now we'll move up to the state of New Hampshire. This is no longer a battleground state, despite Joe Biden only leading in the polls here by an average of 3 points by the time he dropped out. No, it is going to Kamala Harris. The state voted for Joe Biden by 7 points in the last election. This one is, I remember this one really distinctly when it comes to New Hampshire out of these states, which I'm about to outline, because this was the first poll that really showed that Kamala Harris could be a way stronger candidate than we thought when she entered the race. It actually came from New Hampshire. If you scroll down, if you look at the first Harris versus Trump polls from New Hampshire, it's from the University of New Hampshire. In the head-to-head matchup, Kamala Harris led by 7%. Now, this was in the first days, literally days of her campaign. She led by 7. Now, Joe Biden, again, he won by 7.4. So it was looking like Kamala Harris was matching Joe Biden's 2020 numbers. And that was a real shock to the system, right? We never perceived Kamala Harris as a necessarily strong presidential contender in the general election. However, this disproved that, and we started to wonder, whoa, is Kamala Harris a different type of candidate when it comes to her strength than we initially thought? So again, Kamala Harris really able to solidify the Democratic base. That was reflected in in the very first polls of her candidacy, where it was reflected first in these bluer states. Because again, she's a normal Democrat. She has been able to capture this Democratic base, absolutely enough to win Maine as well. Very similar electorate as New Hampshire, with a high proportion of independent voters, which are breaking heavily towards Kamala Harris right now. And then you have the state of Minnesota. Now, Minnesota, another state, Joe Biden only led by 3% on average. Again, these are very weak showings. Joe Biden won it by 7 in 2020. And especially with Tim Walz as vice president, this state is sure to go to Kamala Harris. Now, Hillary Clinton, well, I should have brought this up earlier, but a lot of these states were very close in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. And what it really reflects, Minnesota 1.5, New Hampshire 0.3, Virginia only 5. What it really reflects is the growing partisanship, right, in American voters. Red states are becoming more red. Blue states, as you can see here, a lot of them were really close in 2016. They are now no longer really at all close, right? These very close states from 2020, I'm now saying aren't battlegrounds at all. And again, it reflects really this deep growing partisanship in American politics. Minnesota only went to Hillary Clinton by 1.5%. Now I don't even think we need to talk about it. Same with New Hampshire. It was the closest state I'm sorry, the closest Democratic state in the 2020 election. Hillary Clinton won it by zero point 0.3. Again, this is now one that we don't really need to talk about. But the battleground states are staying competitive. So it's really shrinking in terms of how many states are going to decide presidential elections. The variations of how lopsided a race can go, that is narrowing up big time because you have the Republican states becoming more red, the Democratic states becoming more blue every single election year. So again, and it really reflects how Kamala Harris, all she needs to do is just be a normal Democrat, which she has succeeded at. Hillary Clinton, it also, we're talking about Hillary Clinton, it comes back to the enthusiasm thing. Democrats were not enthusiastic about Kamala Harris. I'm sorry, about Hillary Clinton. Look at these poll numbers. It was even less than where Joe Biden was in the race. Voters enthusiastic about the 2016 election. It was abysmal, almost at 45%, below 50%. That is a historic low, only above 2012, which is interesting. And you know, so that's a major difference when it comes to Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. That's a major reason why I do think that Kamala Harris will win the election. There are just so many differences that make Harris a stronger candidate than Hillary Clinton. So if you still saw Hillary winning states like Minnesota, like New Mexico, like Virginia, like New Hampshire, like Maine, then with these types of numbers with Kamala Harris making Democrats more likely to turn out, then these sorts of states will, in fact, go to Kamala Harris. They are not battlegrounds. And then there's another one. There's New Mexico now. This was a strong Clinton state compared to the others. She won it by 8.2. Biden would go on to win it by 10 4 years later. Again, it all comes back to the fact that Kamala Harris is a normal Democrat. That's all you need. A lot of these, more battleground states, even going down to really close states like Nevada and Michigan, they are states that lean Democratic, right? In election after election, in midterm election after midterm election, as well as the presidential elections and whatever state legislature elections, a lot of these states prove time and time again that there are more Democrat voters than Republican voters, that these states simply lean Democratic. And with someone as weak as Donald Trump leading the Republican ticket, and someone as normal, that's what it comes down to, as someone as normal as Kamala Harris leading the Democratic ticket, these states, that do lean, in fact, Democratic, you don't even need to try that hard at all. Kamala Harris will win the state of New Mexico. That is for sure. And then there's one. There is one that's a bit different from the others. One, because it's a congressional district, but number two, because it actually went to Trump in 2016. And it really shows a lot. Very clearly, it shows a lot about the suburbs in the United States, and that is Nebraska's second congressional district. I believe that Kamala Harris will be easily, or will be able to easily carry Nebraska's second congressional district, because it is an all suburban district. Donald Trump won Nebraska's second. This was a huge upset. He won it by 2.2% in the 2016 election, 2.2%, when 4 years later, Joe Biden would win it by 6.6. So that means that Nebraska's second congressional district became 8.8% more Democratic in just 4 years, while the nation as a whole only became 2.5% more Democratic. So it was a huge disparity. And it doesn't just go for Nebraska's second district, it goes for suburbs all across the country. If you don't know, Nebraska's second is an all suburban district, right? This is Omaha, which is, by Nebraska standards, maybe a city, but compared to other state standards, entirely suburbs. And when you look at these states, Texas is a great example. The suburbs around Dallas, and the suburbs on Pennsylvania is a great example. The parts of these states that trended most towards the Democrats in 2020 was the suburbs. So Kamala Harris has really been able, being a normal Democrat, to capture these more family-oriented voters, right? Suburbs. Who lives in suburbs? It's parents. It's these parents who have a family or once had a family. They are going to be turned off by the sort of rhetoric and attitude of Donald Trump. That is the region that will lose Trump the election for sure, is the suburbs. So Kamala Harris, being the normal candidate that she is, she will be able to pick up Nebraska. Now, the others, this isn't a prediction video. Obviously, Trump is favored in Texas, Trump is favored in Florida, and then you have the 7 core battlegrounds that could really go either way. So when you fill in these states that used to be battlegrounds and no longer are, when you fill them in, Kamala Harris is at 226. Now, before that, without them, it is a significant difference. Kamala Harris loses quite a few states and electoral votes. She's only at 191. She goes from 191 as her floor to, when you give her these states that were once battlegrounds, now not so much, she goes from 191 to 226, a significant boost in such a close election where she needs these electoral votes. So, very interesting scenario going on across these battleground states. Comment to let me know what your thoughts on this. Make sure to subscribe for more political content up to the election. Again, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all later.